Welcome, everyone. We're happy that you're interested in the Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, and we're so glad you could make the time to be with us tonight. My name is Kevin Dixon, and I'm a naturalist with the East Bay Regional Park District at Black Diamond Mines. If you've been following our series of presentations on the new park, you're familiar with some of the history of this place, tightly linked as it is with US military history, but also with the struggle for civil rights in this country and efforts to promote peace. Perhaps you know some of the details of the ranching and agricultural heritage of this land before it came into the hands of the military. Some of you may know more history of the area, including during the Spanish and Mexican periods. Names like Salvio Pacheco and the place Todos Santos, later to become Concord, may be familiar. You may know about the accounts of two early Spanish expeditions to the place we now call the East Bay in 1772 and 1776. Or you may have walked on the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. If you're really up on your local history, you might even be aware that Monte del Diablo was a grove of trees on Pacheco Creek, where Indian people escaped the Spanish military expedition sent from the mission, and that the name Diablo was later applied to the nearby mountain by mistake. Very few of us know native histories of the area, are familiar with indigenous people of the East Bay today, or know native cultural traditions have been maintained from generation to generation over the last 2 centuries, despite the devastating loss and persecution suffered by native families. Many forcefully resisted being removed from the lands they loved. The first people of this place, the Chupcan, along with their neighbors, the Ompin, the Hulpun, the Volvon, the Tatcan, and the Saklan, have lived within the vicinity of what is now called Mount Diablo since time immemorial. These sovereign groups all spoke the language known as Bay Miwok, and like other tribes in the East Bay, maintained their own rich traditions and ways of life. Before the arrival of Spanish soldiers and missionaries, the Chupcan maintained an intimate and reciprocal relationship with the land and waters of the place, a kind of relationship that's hard to imagine today. The Chupcan shared the hills here with bear, elk, and pronghorn antelope, the waters with tremendous runs of salmon, hillsides, ridges, and valleys with proper care provided food and medicine. Since the time when this place was stewarded by the Chupcan people, however, much has changed. Recently, this landscape has been valued for its industrial utility rather than its inherent character, uniquely connected to the people. It has been poisoned, bulldozed, covered over, drained, defoliated, and ultimately changed irrevocably. The wildflowers that provided foods like what the Spanish, borrowing from Nahuatl language, called pinole, cacomites, and amole, are now few and far between. Many of us have grown up in the East Bay, and it's hard for us to imagine the natural richness of a land not paved or drained, and river and bay shores not filled and built up. Thurgood Marshall Regional Park is ecologically a shadow of its former self. The ancient bunch grasses and the deeply colorful swaths of wildflowers that grew together with them are gone. The rich riparian zones around the streams are vastly diminished. Clearly, there is much to be learned about relationships with the land and about sustainability. We hope to engage all East Bay communities in a new and healthy relationship with this special place, so full of historical lessons. We're fortunate and grateful to have with us today 3 guests with ancestral ties to Bay Miwok homelands. They have generously agreed to share with us their unique and individual perspectives on what it means to them as Native people living within the vicinity of their ancestral territory to have deep roots in the East Bay. We hope that the future Thurgood Marshall Regional Park will suitably honor Native heritage and the Native people of today.
Porsche Tuhi Kana Rakat Andrew Galvin. Good day in my Chochenyo Ohlone language. My name is Andrew Galvin. I am an Ohlone Bay Miwok man, indigenous to the San Francisco East Bay area. I am pleased to offer this greeting and land acknowledgement. I trace my ancestry, my Bay Miwok ancestry that is, to the village of Saklan, modern day Walnut Creek. It is from that village that in the year 1794, the Spanish military from Mission Dolores, San Francisco, rounded up my great-great-great-great-grandfather, a man named Poilemja, and brought him to Mission Dolores. We can pretty much say against his own free will. There, at the age of 30 is what they estimate his age to have been. He was baptized and renamed with a Christian name of Faustino. And it is from there that most of us who trace our ancestry to the San Francisco East Bay today tie into that line. Other speakers that you will hear today, specifically Ruth Orta, her mother and my grandmother are sisters. And also today, you are going to hear from Corrina Gould, and her grandmother is a sister to my grandmother, or no, her great grandmother is a sister to my grandmother and Ruth's mother. So we share a common ancestry that goes all the way back to Poilemja, our Bay Miwok ancestry. It is there that in San Francisco Mission that the lives of our Bay Miwok ancestors were changed, but never killed or crushed. So I would like to welcome you to Ohlone Bay Miwok villages of the San Francisco Bay region. In the San Francisco East Bay, we speak Chochenyo. In the Santa Clara Valley, we speak Tamien. And the San Francisco Peninsula area, we still speak Ramaytush. I had wanted to greet you in person, but life sometimes takes sudden change without using the turn signal. The present COVID-19 pandemic certainly understates the truth of that statement. Contagious disease is nothing new to the native peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area. During a measles epidemic in the year 1806, the average Indian populations at the San Francisco Bay region missions, that is Mission Dolores in San Francisco, Mission San Jose in Fremont, and Mission Santa Clara in the Santa Clara Valley, each had a population of about 850. At each one of those missions, in a 3-day period, in late April 1806, on an average, at each of those three missions, over 300 Indians died from the measles. I repeat, contagious disease is nothing new to the people of the San Francisco Bay region. We want all of you to learn about the enduring strength of Ohlone Bay Miwok culture in honest and authentic ways. 252 years ago, in November 1769, the Spanish missionaries and soldiers arrived here in the San Francisco Bay region. 1772 for the San Francisco East Bay, which at that time was also known as the Contra Costa, the other side. Life during the mission and rancho periods was not easy for Native peoples. In these places, Ohlones, Miwoks, Yokuts, and many other Indian people were worked hard by the Spanish military, and they could not leave if they wanted to, amounted to slavery. At missions San Francisco, Santa Clara, and San Jose, the very language I greeted you in was suppressed. However, our ancestors refused to give up the things they cared for. While we cannot change the history of colonization here in California, we can tell an honest story that brings dignity and pride to our community. Once again, I welcome you to Ohlone and Bay Miwok territory, and as my late father, Felipe Phil Galvin, would say, you can stay here on one condition, that condition being that you are good. Kish Horshe Ek Hinan, my heart is good. Now I know the park that we are celebrating today, if you're standing out there, or if you know it, you can see what today we call Mount Diablo. In our language, Tushtak. Tushtak. That's the name of Mount Diablo. It's our sacred place. It's sacred place, a high power point, like in many cultural traditions, the people go up the mountains to commune with the Creator. In the San Francisco Bay region, pretty much you can stand on top of Tushtak and you can see to the north and a bit over to the west, Mount Tamalpais. And if you look to the south, you can see Mount Hamilton. The three power points that fit into our creation stories as the place where the people go, they go up to communicate with the Creator. So I would like to tell a story, share a story, how grandfather created the world. Sometimes it's necessary to tell or describe the characters in our traditional stories to the uninitiated, because you may not know these terms, as if I were telling a regular story about Snoopy Peanuts characters. Everybody knows those pretty much. So I have to fill you in on the background so you understand the characters in this story. There are three. The first is grandfather. Now, before the politically correct start bashing me, I cannot change how the story was told to meet 21st century standards. I have to tell the story the way it was handed down in the oral tradition to respect the oral tradition. Grandfather does not negate the role of women. Actually, it honors the role of women, because if there's a grandfather, then somewhere there must be a grandmother. You need both to cooperate in creation. So by saying grandfather, we're acknowledging the presence of grandmother. For this story, when we talk about grandfather, I would like you to think of a very old elderly person, a man with white hair, maybe even a long white beard. And as I often tell the children, don't start thinking Santa Claus, but perhaps sometimes that is the good image for thinking of a creator, is a loving grandfather. And in our tradition, we use grandfather instead of father because every child knows mom and dad are the disciplinarians, whereas grandparents give permission to break all of mom and dad's rules. So grandfather, a loving, caring individual who gives all kinds of permissions. The second image for this story, if you remember in the classroom, there used to be a globe of the world and sitting on a stand, a pedestal like. And if you were to spin that globe quickly, you would mostly see blue representing water. So that's image number 2, the blue globe representing the earth covered in water. The third image I want you to think about is a huge, enormous bird, not Sesame Street's Big Bird, but a large, glorious bird such as an eagle. Think of an eagle soaring through the skies. So now you have the setup of the characters. Grandfather, the old man, who is creator, our globe of the world, and that big, beautiful eagle. Now, when telling stories, every one of you out there is a storyteller. And so when this is all over, you have my permission to retell this story, okay? Because, and I'm going to ask you to help me out, this story takes place a long, long time ago in a place far, far away. So you see, you all know the opening 2 lines to every story that has ever been told. So let me tell the story now. This story was handed down to me from my father, who heard it from his uncle, Uncle Dario, who had also heard it from his grandfather, who had been at the missions during the mission times. So we believe that Uncle Dario's grandfather, who also was brought into the missions, lived in the traditional countryside of the East Bay. So this would have been a story that was handed down in the East Bay oral tradition. And it's entitled, How Grandfather Created the World. Long, long ago, Grandfather was out in the universe where he lives. He saw a great blue ball of water. He wanted to go visit it, but it was a very long journey to go from the place where Grandfather lived to this place today we call Earth. Grandfather decided he would become an eagle and fly off to visit the Earth. Grandfather, in the form of an eagle, began the long journey. He began flying through the skies. Suddenly, Grandfather came into the middle of a group of meteors, and he was knocked down. So Grandfather flew back home. Grandfather still wanted to go and see the place the people called Earth. So Grandfather plucked a feather from his wing and put his whole spirit into the feather. Grandfather said, I'll send this feather on a long journey, and I'll put my spirit in the feather. That way I can go visit the place they call Earth. The feather was sent on a long journey to Earth. At that time, the Earth was all covered in water. The feather landed in the water and started a spinning whirlpool. Grandfather, in the spirit of the feather, had started the whirlpool, and then Grandfather's spirit started to draw the world with the feather. He drew the hills, the mountains, the valleys, the plants, the oceans, the rivers, the creeks, and streams. Grandfather also drew people. He drew each person with a different face. Today, if you look all around at all the faces about you, you will see that each one is different. The moral of the story is this. Grandfather drew everything. And when Grandfather draws, Grandfather only draws perfectly. Although everything in the world is curves and corners, not straight lines and squares, everything is the way grandfather drew it. In the end, grandfather draws straight with crooked lines.
Can you state your full name?
Ruth Horta.
And Ruth, where were you born?
Newark, California, on Sycamore Street, in a house. I am 86, I'll be 87 August the 20th of this year, next month.
And how long have you lived in the Bay Area?
86 years. Well, actually 87 because I was my mommy's tummy already. All my life.
And do you have kids?
7. And I have 17 grandkids. I have 38 great grandkids and still counting. And I have 14 great greats and still counting.
And do they all live in the area?
No, unfortunately, my children, I only have one that lives in the Bay Area. And that's my youngest one, my Rick, lives in Union City. All the rest of the kids live in the Central Valley and beyond. And some of the grandkids live out of state, and none of the great grandkids live. Yeah, I have one in New York and one in, I think she still lives in Utah.
So we will be opening the new Thurgood Marshall Regional Park. And can you tell us a little bit about what do you think is important for those visitors to that park to know about Native peoples?
The first thing right off is we're still here and living, alive. And since time began in this part of the world is when we came. Because we go back thousands of years in the excavations that they have now and how old the remains are. So, but I knew from my mom. My mom was the native. She was first generation in her family to have non-native blood in her. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, was full-blood native from California.
Did your mom speak her native language?
No, she spoke Spanish, and that was her father's language. He was a redheaded Spaniard, as my mom described him, from Costa Rica. And he died in 1910. We do have the year he died, but not my grandmother. They didn't keep records on the native people.
So why didn't your mom speak her native language?
Because she thought her language was Spanish because that's what she spoke. But then when she got older and realized that, you know, our people had another language, then she knew that wasn't her native language. And English wasn't her native language, but that's what she spoke as a child. She was a little tiny kid going to, the Dominicans would pick the kids up and take them to the school on Washington Boulevard in Mission San Jose. That's where the Dominicans had their orphanage, and with the St. Mary of the Palms convent, and that was a private school for the people with money to send their kids to. And the nuns had an orphanage on the property. I still remember where it was at and everything, but you can't tell it was even ever there because there's big homes in that part of the world now. And so anyway, she was raised in that orphanage, and she got out in 1914 when she was 12. And her brother, my Uncle Lucas, who was almost 3 years older than her, he was sent up to Ukiah to go to the boys' part, which was the Albertinium school run by the Dominicans at Mission San Jose. And so they separated them when their dad died in 1910. And so the nuns took and put them in the orphanage, and they were there until 1914. And then they were they went and let go at the time to go on their own. So they stayed with some of the relatives, I imagine, in the area. But both of them got jobs with the farmers. My mom is a cook, a babysitter, or a caretaker, and a housekeeper. And my uncle as a farm worker, or he worked with the equipment also. But they were really two educated young people. And the nuns did a good job as far as education. And they had two bright, open-minded children to soak up all the learning that they got, because they were two brilliant young people to survive and be on their own. And Mom was the youngest one in the family that was still living in 1902 when she was born. And then when they got out of the orphanage in 1914. So that's how my mom survived. And super independent little lady. She was 4'10". She looked totally native. She didn't show any of her Spanish. And a very proud person to teach her kids to respect everyone in the world, and to never say you can't do something, because her motto was, if that person there could do that job, so could she, because they were created the same way. And so she was an awesome, awesome woman. My mom was the best teacher. In fact, she was my inspiration my whole entire life, because my work career started when we were little kids, because we worked in the fields with my mom. She would take us and we would go work in the fields, and the tomatoes, the string beans, the sweet peas, strawberries. We picked everything. Cut apricots, picked cherries. And then also we used to go on the farms, the dairy farms, and get mushrooms. And to this day, I hate mushrooms. So we learned a lot from my mom. We learned as much as we could about our Native people, but we didn't know the sad stories with the missions and the orphanages and the boarding schools and the racism, because Mom never let anything like that bother us. And
did you grow up knowing that you were a Native?
Totally, my whole entire life, all 86 years. And I'm sure my mom used to tell me when I was in her tummy. So, no, and we lived just like my neighbor and everybody else, because that's the way we had to do. And like I said, we were poor. We didn't have any land. Mom never had a home until she was in her 70s. In her 70s is when they bought their first home in Newark on Railroad Avenue. And that was the first time that my mom ever owned a home. Up until that time, we lived in little shacks, rentals, cheap. I think the last house we lived in Centerville in Fremont, and it was $750 a month. But it was a little shack on stilts. But Mom made it a beautiful home, just to be who she was. So.
And when did you really start learning more about your heritage?
When I was 50 years old, my mom and I, the day that Bev Ortiz took me to the California Indian Conference at Berkeley, was the first time I ever heard a native language from people from all over the area. I had never heard it. And my mom never got to hear the language spoken, or me attending a California Indian Conference. And I always questioned my mother when I was little, because I loved history. And she used to read to us all the time when we were little growing up. And another thing I want to say about my mom is, when I came home from school is when I learned how to do everything. She helped us with our homework. She helped us with our history, everything. And if not, I wouldn't be who I am today. And she told us, when you never say you can't do something, because that person right there is a human just like you, and you can do it. They can do it, you can do it. So she was my inspiration my whole entire life, because every job I worked 54 years of my life. I retired when I was 70. Every job I learned, from factories, from hospitals, And then I ended up in transit for, 21 years on the transit bus and 7 years or 8 years for a school bus driver. And then I was also a truck delivery driver, first person. And I always felt good because I was a woman, short, older, and I was Native, a female and a Native. And I was so proud of everything I accomplished because my mom said, don't ever say you can't do something. And to this day, I'm going to be 87. I still learn something new every day. But I want to say I do not like the electronic era because I can't stand humans running around with a little thing in their hand when we don't talk to each other any longer and we don't share our stories of our family history and all that. And it's sad. So I don't like this era at all. But thank God there's a camera taking my picture. I learned how to process acorn or to prepare acorn through the East Bay Regional Park District in the 1990s when I first met Bev Ortiz, who was a park naturalist here. And she introduced us to other natives along the coast that belonged to the Ohlone people that we connected, which I think all natives are brothers and sisters to me. We're all brothers and sisters. So we got to learn from Julia Parker, who is from, she worked at Yosemite Park as a native person, and she came to Coyote Hills in Fremont and taught us how to do some of the ways that our people, and that was the first time I had ever learned how they prepared acorn, the soap root brush, and you can also eat the soap root brush, but it was served as a brush, little brush like we called them whisk brooms growing up. That's the white man's word for it. And that was to clean dust things, a smaller brush, and that's what the soap root brush was. But the bulb that you make the paste to put that brush together is edible, and it had nutrients in it. So all natives ate everything that came out of the ground anyway, so, or fish, yes. My mom grew a lot of her own food in gardens, and also we were lucky that we worked in the farms and stuff, because a lot of the farmers used to give us a lot of their things to take home when we were done working. So I was lucky to know, all that. So if anything happens to me today and everything stops in this electronic era and nobody can do anything or make food or anything, I still know how to put seeds in the ground. So I could grow something. I wouldn't go hungry, or my family wouldn't go hungry. So that was a lot of things that we learned as kids, and especially my mom. My mom was very respectful, and natives said prayers and to thank Creator for the food, give it back to Mother Earth, and they thanked Mother Earth also. So it was a different way, but I think my mom had the modern day and way of telling us as we were growing up, because she was very respectful of food.
All right. I know I said that was the last question, but just one follow-up. So the way, your mom taught you about respecting, the earth and, all the food, do you think that that's similar to the way that, like, your ancestors, who lived in the Bay Area, do you think that's a similar, like, how they felt, like, their respect for the lands?
I think so, because a tradition that was for the people that in my day, because I was born in 1934, so in my day, it was different. You just knew as you're growing up, you respected what was served to you and what was edible and what was things that you had to care for, and that was just part of me. In fact, I don't like the modern technology and stuff, because there's no human contact and there's no person teaching you how to do something. You just yell into this little thing and say, what do I do to fix this? And then something comes back and tells you. And I tell the kids, that's not the way you do things. Common sense is not here today. And that's how common sense was in all natives of all parts of the world, or else we wouldn't be here.
Porchetuhi Ka'atlashanka Ka'atra'at Corrina. Good afternoon. My name is Corrina Gould. I am the tribal chairperson for the Confederated Villages of Lishan. The Confederation is made up of 5 different tribes that were enslaved at Mission San Jose: the Bay Miwok, the Plains Miwok, the Delta Yokut, Napian, and Ohlone people. Our people have survived through 3 waves of genocide: the Spanish missionization, the Mexican Rancho period, and currently the occupation of the United States. My ancestors have an unbroken tie to this territory, the place that we call Chupcan, a place that is dear to our hearts. It's a part of our creation story, a place where we believe our ancestors were created to be a part of this land. We have never left the landscape, although in many ways we have been taken out of history through being taught only in 4th grade, by being disappeared, by not being talked about again. We've been disappeared by the federal government by taking away our federal recognition, as we are one of the oldest bands here, the Verona band that was here in Pleasanton, that was also a confederation of those people that were at Mission San Jose. But our ancestors have been here, and we still are here. I was raised in the territory of Huchin in the East Bay. I've raised my children here and my grandchildren here. We are in the middle of recreating our languages. My great-grandfather, Jose Guzman, was one of the last speakers of the language. Although he was Delta Yokut, he held on to this language of Chochenyo, and held on to that language in such a beautiful way that we were able to bring back songs, and we were bringing back our ceremonies again to our lands. The Lishan people are the only people in our territory who have had land returned to them, where we have placed an arbor on the land where we can have ceremonies again in our territory. The first piece of land in 250 years to be returned back to the original inhabitants, my ancestors, our people. We have connections to other tribal people in the state of California, and we work on creating relationships with all people that now live in our territory. We work with many people across many different organizations and interfaith communities to ensure that we are good hosts to those that want to be good guests on our land. We ask people to take care and to remember that they are not here alone, that the original people of this land are still here. We have an obligation to take care of our territories. And in taking care of our territories and our waterways, our plants, our language, our ceremonies, we also take care of those that now live in our territories as well. We believe that our ancestors put down prayers thousands of years ago for all of us, including those that have now come to live in our territories. But there needs to be a way that we live in reciprocity with the lands. You see, we believe that we were part of creation. We were created as part of the landscape, that we are not a part from it, but a part of it. And that as human beings, we need to come back to thinking in those kinds of ways. When we think about climate disaster that's happening, it doesn't just affect us, it affects every living being on this planet. But it's human beings that have to come back into relationship with the planet, back into relationship with our Mother Earth, back into relationship with our waters, back into relationship with those other beings that don't have a human voice. And so we pray still at our waterways, our sacred mountains, those places that we have always had connection to. Sometimes we see landscapes that don't look like native landscapes because in our minds, we think of native people living on reservations far away. But we live in the same urban areas that all of you do today. We live in houses and we have cars and cell phones and go to sporting events. Our children are in elementary schools and high schools. They go to colleges, just like all of yours do. We encourage you to think about things in the present tense. How do we all, as human beings, come together to ensure that our children's children's children for the next 7 generations have good, clean, fresh air and water, good soil to grow medicines and foods on, and have a relationship with fire again that isn't scary. A way for us to remember what our relationship is. At one time, fire was a relationship to all human beings by giving warmth, being able to cook our foods, being able to give us light. If we remember that good relationship, we don't have to be fearful, but we can come together and find out ways of how to live on this planet, leaving a smaller footprint on this earth, like my ancestors did before contact. We thank you so much for coming to Chupcan. We ask that you take care of this land like our ancestors did. You leave a small footprint. You take out doesn't belong in the landscapes. You remember to create relationships with the First Nation peoples on whose land you are on. That all land in what we now call the United States is native land. And we build those relationships together to create a better world for the next 7 generations. Thank you so much.
Our deepest thanks to Andrew Galvin, Ruth Orta, and Corrina Gould for sharing their stories with us. Thanks also to East Bay Regional Parks Cultural Services Coordinator Anna Marie Guerrero and Black Diamond Mines Park Supervisor Kevin Damstra, who edited the videos. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and we look forward to seeing you out in your parks. We'll post on Black Diamond's Facebook page a short list of links to people, groups, and resources that may provide a starting point for learning more. Please feel free to comment on Facebook or to email our staff with questions at bdvisit@ebparks.org. So that's BDVISIT at EBPARKS.org. Thanks again, everyone, for coming.